Hello everyone and welcome back to SamCentre. I am your host, Sam. As always, on this very special edition of Victory Monday, it is June 29th and we could not be more excited to talk about the weekend that just happened. We're going to wrap up the weekend, talk the World Cup Round of 32 starting, and then we're going to get in our UFC and CFL recaps before we look at the week ahead. I'm so excited to break everything down with you guys this week. Let's run the intro. Alright, what a weekend it was in the sports world. Depending on what you're interested in, depending on the leagues that you follow, multiple different sports were in action. We're going to break down the UFC a little bit later in the show. Obviously, we're going to talk CFL on this beautiful Victory Monday. But let's start off the show talking about the NHL Draft, which we just experienced over the weekend, and it was quite clear who was going number one overall. I think it's been clear since this young man was 15 years old, he was going to be the projected number one pick in whatever draft class he ended up being able to enter, and it was Gavin McKenna, going first overall to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Congratulations to you and your family, and congratulations to the Toronto Maple Leafs organization. I think this is a clear-cut picture of us choosing who the best player available is and not having to just force a fit on who we think is going to be the best day one player. And so that's the biggest thing with Gavin McKenna. I think it's quite, like we mentioned, it's been quite obvious ever since he was a young man. This guy had the potential to be up there, mentioned with the top prospects, right? It's hard to project and say this guy's going to be the next Gretzky, but we can at least say since he was playing high-level junior hockey at a very young age, it's quite likely that if he can stay the course, stay consistent, he's going to be number one overall pick in his draft class. That's exactly what we saw when he finally came of age. And for Toronto, it makes a lot of sense. You now have another potential star, a guy who's capable of putting up obscene amount of points, which he did in junior, but another guy who now you can market to the Canadian audience and say, hey, we are the Toronto Maple Leafs. We believe that we are a big piece of Canada's culture and at least culture out here in Toronto. We now have a Canadian superstar as opposed to what they had done with Austin Matthews, who was their previous number one overall pick, and an American superstar and a guy who Austin Matthews, to his credit, has not abandoned the franchise at all. He will be there on the day one roster pending something insane obviously happening. But with the American guys, you're starting to see some cracks potentially develop in some of their markets wanting out of different Canadian places when things aren't going well. So for Toronto, you've now kept Austin Matthews. You've kept him relatively happy. If he can come back healthy, if he can come back just as strong as he's always been, you have a Gavin McKenna who can slot in there and become a playmaker day one, because I think Gavin is really going to struggle just with putting on, weight, putting on experience, putting on a little bit of age in the league. It's hard for these young guys to come in freshly out of playing, high level junior hockey or university level hockey. There's quite a bit of difference when you play the pros. Like you look at some of the guys in this league, even some people who are just drafted, 6'7", 280 plus pounds. Some of these guys are monsters and they're grown men. So Gavin McKenna, I believe, has the largest amount of skill ceiling out of any one of the prospects in the draft. I'm just not sure if he's going to be the day one best draft pick. So there's going to be questions for is Stenberg, is Malhotra, are these guys better day one than Gavin McKenna? And maybe that's the case. San Jose decided to go forward and then pick up some defensemen later in the first round. And I think that was really good for their draft strategy. The Sharks are an organization now that we have to watch and pay attention to. They got their feet wet, attempting to get into the playoffs and being in a playoff race till late. And they have a guy in Macklin Celebrini who really does seem like he's going to be at the top of our league for a lot of years to come. So you get him another guy who can really facilitate offense, can potentially anchor a wing on Celebrini's line for many years. That's huge for San Jose. And then you go and get some top defensemen later in the draft who now you have a ton of marketable young assets for the San Jose Sharks organization. And then you decide what you want to do. The guys that you want to keep around and you believe are part of your future, then you keep them around and you reward them with contracts and you make them part of your core. But now you have some pretty good trade chips. I mean, there's going to be stars that pop up and be available. There's different times where guys are potentially restricted free agents, free agencies coming up. You just saw captains get moved. You see potentially McDavid in a year, maybe wanting out of Edmonton. Whatever these situations end up being, the Sharks are in prime position now to strike and get one of these players. They have a ton of draft capital. They have a ton of young, marketable prospects that they can give up in return for stars. And then they have other guys who will now have a year or two of NHL experience when they're ready to pull the trigger. So I would not be shocked if in a couple years we're recording SamCentre and I'm going to play this clip back. I believe the San Jose Sharks have an excellent chance at winning a Stanley Cup within the next 5 years, just because of how young their core is going to be, stacking up multiple first-round draft picks in pretty good draft classes, bringing them all together, being in a state like California, which is going to be desirable for free agents and potentially trade. Listen, maybe we'll be shooting it back to Psychic Sammy in a few years, but we'll see about all that. We are way ahead of ourselves because they just chose second in the draft. Third, Vancouver chose Caleb Malhotra, and it was very, very interesting because he is the son of the newly minted head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. Something that, it has the potential to work out. I don't necessarily see this as being an immediate red flag because I believe Caleb was probably the third best prospect available. Someone that Vancouver can now target as being a center one for them for the foreseeable future. That's what you're looking at with the number 3 overall pick, obviously, right? And then somebody who hopefully your head coach can get the most out of, in a sense, right? You're hoping that your head coach can really knows his son, knows what he's capable of. There's no ever tension or maybe other things that can creep into the locker room. You have to assume none of that will happen because, Rick and Jalen just won a championship together in the NBA on the New York Knicks. As much as Rick was not the head coach, he was an assistant coach. I don't know how much of a dynamic that, I'm sure it does change it. So we'll see, right? I think clear winners in this draft, Toronto got the best player available in my mind, so Toronto would be the number 1 winner. San Jose picked up 3 excellent prospects in the first round, so I think San Jose would also be one of the winners. And then Nashville is actually going to be my sleeper pick for who I think also had an excellent first round. Picked up multiple prospects, areas of need, and Nashville was kind of that fringe contending team for a little bit. So depending on what they do next, I think it really could either propel themselves forward or have them take a step back. And I like what they did, I think. So let's talk FIFA round of 32. All right, before we move on to our UFC and CFL segments of the show, let's talk World Cup round of 32 for just a moment. For the first time in Canadian soccer history, as you are watching this video yesterday, but as I'm recording it today, Canada has advanced past the knockout stage, and it was an incredible performance, 1-0, defeating South Africa, scoring in the 92nd minute of the game. There were multiple chances for Canada. Canada had the opportunities, and it just seemed like they didn't strike the ball cleanly. South Africa, to their credit, they played physical, they played tough. It seemed like the refs were really letting a lot go, but maybe that's better for the players on the field. I don't really know. I feel like they fall down all the time and you call it, and then I saw some guys get tackled and you didn't call it. Whatever. But what my point stands that Canada is advancing, and that's all that matters. Because now you look at our next matchup, it's either the winner of the Netherlands and Morocco, and to me, it's going to be a difficult game. Both those teams, both those nations are much more highly rated than Canada is as far as the overall FIFA standings. But there's something about this Canadian team where they're willing to fight, they're willing to put up a good effort in each one of their games, and it could be closer than people are giving Canada credit for. Personally, it's hard to really predict much more because this is the first time Canada's ever made it this far. So it is a massive win for Canada soccer, and it's potentially an opportunity for the game to be grown domestically a little bit more than it has in the past. You look at potentially the demographic of young people changing. Obviously, hockey is always going to be very popular. We're going to play other sports here in Canada, and the winter sports are going to take over. But with much more indoor facilities being built, and with different demographics of people coming into Canada, you could see this win potentially being the stepping stone for a whole generation of players to build up this national team. And this might not be the peak of Canada soccer. Right now, it is one of the best moments that we've had in a long time in Canadian sports. It's something that can unite the entire country. Props to you, Canada men's soccer team. An incredible showing so far at the World Cup. Job is not done yet, But if the journey ends in the next round, I'm not sure there's a lot of Canadian soccer fans who would call this a wash, that's for sure. We'd say this was a success, as well as other nations who are in action in the round of 32. A nation like Cape Verde maybe never expected to actually qualify or even get a point alone at the World Cup. And now they are going to take on Lionel Messi in the round of 32. And for fans of Cape Verde, their entire country is the size of a lot of cities across North America, and it's an extremely cool story. They're obviously going to get smoked by Argentina. I'm sure that betting line will be the worst out of anyone in the entire tournament, and for good reason. Argentina is a true contender to win the World Cup, where Cape Verde is obviously not. But these stories matter to a lot of these teams. You see the Congo, you see Cape Verde, you see Canada, and you potentially see an entire generation of people who now believe there's a future in soccer playing this sport. It's not something that I personally watch often, but I think the World Cup has opened my eyes to say this sport is truly global. These athletes are actually incredible. The amount that they run. You know, my dad made a comment how you never really see anyone overweight associate with soccer. And it's kind of a good point, right? The athletes that are doing this, the hydration breaks, at first I was on the fence, but I think it's probably pretty fair with the amount that they run, the size of these fields, playing in the heat in Los Angeles, going over to Houston, Texas for the next round for Canada. Mexico will be in action. You will have the United States in action as well. Obviously France, Portugal, all of the stars are going to be in the round of 32 over these next couple of days. I would encourage you to tune in, maybe see Messi, maybe see Ronaldo. It could be the last time you see these stars. Seeing them in these very cool football stadiums across, the United States, like SoFi. It was converted into a soccer stadium. I thought it looked awesome. You had 80,000 fans as opposed to some of these other places, maybe in Europe or other places in the world that can fit about 50,000. So the atmosphere, awesome. Canada, awesome. And we are going to talk on Wednesday about the rest of the results. I'm sure we're going to talk Messi, Ronaldo, Mbappe, everything in between. Let's throw it down to the UFC segment. All right. Let's talk UFC/PFL. It was an exciting weekend in the MMA world. The UFC was over in Baku, Azerbaijan, and it was an awesome main event for the Azerbaijanis with Rafael Fiziev taking home the main event victory against a guy in Manuel Torres who we said, it's going to be round one or bust. And it basically was. We said that Manuel Torres has not made it out of the first round in 12 of his last 13 fights. And this one made it out of the first round. So don't I look like an idiot? By 13 seconds. 13 seconds into the second. He finally makes it out of the first round. He lasts 13 seconds before he gets KO'd violently by Rafael Fiziev in front of his entire screaming audience in Azerbaijan. It was kind of a mixed bag of results for fights. We'll talk about the rest of the ones that we had broken down on Friday's show. There were kind of some controversies. There were a few decisions that kind of maybe went the other way. Some clear beatdowns and early stoppage potentially, but being able to bring it home with Rafael. And then he calls out Charles Oliveira. He says he wants the BMF belt. I don't think that's what's next for him. I don't really think that's where they need to go with Rafael. I think Charles probably waits for the belt or goes a rematch against, I would think Justin in some way makes a lot of sense. Maybe he fights Arman for the number one contender. So I don't think Fiziev is what's next for Charles Oliveira. But there is now a place for Rafael on the roster, obviously challenging that top 7-ish. It's hard to say what's next for him. As for his opponent, Manuel Torres, I don't know. I like Manuel Torres a lot, but we said it could be, if this fight makes it out of the first round, which it did by 13 seconds, it's going to be potentially a veteran lesson for Manuel Torres. And that's exactly what happened. It was really easy for Rafael in the first round. Fend off a couple takedowns. He got taken down a couple times, pops back up, just puts consistent pressure and damage. Pretty clean counter shot into the knockout, into the ground and pound. So congratulations, Azerbaijan, in the main event. It went really well for you. In the co-main event, though, man, cut them both. Both these guys, Shara Margamedov and Michel Pereira, I want you both out of the UFC by Tuesday. But in all seriousness, Shara sucks. I mean, he doesn't suck, but he's just not good. Like, what were we thinking? He literally has one eyeball. And we're like, yeah, we should let him cage fight. And it's kind of gone really well, I guess, right? Like he only has one loss this to an extremely high level guy, Michael Venom Page. But this could have easily been loss number 2. Because Michel Pereira absolutely flatlines Chara in the first round. And now Chara is grabbing for the legs. He's just trying to survive. And me holding that Chara Magomedov ticket, sitting there just like, I better not do it with one eyeball. And then, obviously, as he tells him the fight, we mentioned Michel Pereira at this point should not be fighting. He lied about his age. He's 102. He's not 32. And so these Brazilians come in here. He's probably 40 or 41. And he showed it. He has one good flurry of cardio in which he was able to really touch Chara and put him down violently to where he almost finished the fight. We're going to talk about potentially an early stoppage a little bit earlier on the card. If that same ref is reffing this fight, it is stopped. And actually, we need to talk about this because I am not somebody who hates Herb Dean. I kind of like Herb. But the controversy has been following this man, unfortunately, the past couple weeks. He was obviously the ref in the Alex Pereira fight. We talked about that. And now this fight, Chara Magomedov is a cheater. He's a guy who had to cheat in order to beat a bad fighter in Michel Pereira. He literally grabs Michel Pereira's hair when they're grappling in the second round and is pulling his head down by the hair. Herb steps in, says, hey, don't do that again. Final warning. He pulls the hair again. Herb stands them up and says, hey, in the corner with the translator. If he fouls again, he's getting a point taken. So, and this is coming from someone who's holding a bet with Chara Magomedov. Okay, so I want him to win. Then, he goes back to that position. They get stood up. The first thing Chara does is intentionally eye poke Michel Pereira. And I won't even sugarcoat this. He poked him in the eye on purpose. Clear as day, hands forward like this. And now you're looking at it. What are we doing? So Herb, you just warned the guy that he can't pull a guy's hair. He knows that. He has 17, 18 cage fights, as well as how many amateurs. He has one eye. He doesn't have half a brain. He knows he can't pull hair. So he does it twice. And you tell him, you foul one more time, and I'm taking a point. And then he pokes Michel Pereira in the eye violently. And Herb just is like, that's another mistake. So Herb, obviously, you're in the controversy a little bit. You're a great ref. It's been around the game for a long, long time. I don't think anyone is calling for Herb Dean. Well, obviously, there are people calling for this. I am not calling for Herb Dean to never referee in the UFC again. What I'm saying, though, is the UFC really needs to make a point. You start to penalize these fighters for doing goofy stuff like this, and it's going to stop instantly. And obviously, there's going to be times where something happens. An accidental groin kick because somebody goes to check a leg kick, slides up, hits the cup. An eye poke because it glances off the side, something like that. A back of the head strike when Surreal's pound, whatever. These things will happen, but if they're not refereed, then they're not rules. You know what I'm saying? Like, if Chara can do this and have no controversy and still win the fight 29-28, so by 1 point he won the fight, then there's no actual rules. He's allowed to grab the hair, and he's allowed to eye poke because he just won the fight 2-1 in a 3-round fight, and you didn't take a point. So if we want to focus on fighter safety, the UFC needs to do a reffing clinic, get them all together, say, hey, we're not going to single out anyone in particular. These are the things you now watch for, and you make it very obvious to the fighters. You've been warned pregame. All of you know you can't do this, so you do it. Accidental or not, it affects the fight. It affects Michel Pereira's ability to defend himself now. He's compromised in one eye. That cannot happen without some sort of punishment. And if you start to punish it, you will see the fighters adjust. I guarantee it. They say you can't stop these things. I don't buy it. There's a lot of fighters who don't do it, and there's a few that do, and you can always tell the cheaters when looking at them. Sometimes they have one eye, and they're named Chara Magomedov. Cut both of these bums. Moving on. Asu Al-Mabayev defeating Charles Johnson, and this was a round 3 submission in a not super competitive fight. Asu just multiple times took Charles Johnson down. Charles, for the most part, did a pretty good job defending a lot of the takedowns. He had a couple decent moments on the feet, but nothing with any actual power coming back the way of Asu. He was able to dominate the fight from the very beginning, taking down Charles Johnson. And I think this now officially puts to rest the Charles Johnson title run. That kind of sucks. I do like him. I like his fighting style. He had history. He has history with Josh Van, the current champion, obviously. So it doesn't mean that Charles Johnson needs to not be in the UFC anymore. I think you just now need to pick your fights. Keep him as that prospect buster, maybe. Have him fight guys with stand-up and not these grappling fights, because I could probably take down Charles Johnson. Also, I'm going to add a picture of his haircut. What is going on? Moving on. Asu, very good performance. I think he has a loss to Manel Kape, so he has some history with some guys in the top 5. I think that's where you go with Asu next. You probably have him challenge the top 5. Maybe you run it back, number 1 contender, Asu Amabayev, Manel Kape, because I think, like I said, you have to run Pantoja Van. So then you go number 1 contender, Asu Amabayev, Manel Kape. I love that. And they both just fought recently, right? So you can do that again. Let's go on. Mateus Camilo defeated Nazim Sadykhov. And this is where I'm going to talk maybe early stoppage. I mean, it is what it is. I don't think both these guys are really that good. I think, props to Camilo. He came in there as a pretty big underdog. The Brazilian in enemy territory. He put down the kind of home region fighter in Sadykhov with a straight shot with a KO. But it wasn't a clean knockout. Obviously Sadykhov went to the ground and was shelled up defending himself. And I'm going to say none of the shots from Camilo really got through. But the ref said clearly multiple times, do something, move, defend yourself. And he didn't. He just stayed turtled. So do I want to see that fight maybe go an extra 35 seconds? Probably. I think you do give the guy the benefit of the doubt. It's the very first round. A minute and something in. He wasn't KO'd clean. Like, it wasn't a horrible shot. He got stunned. Because you let Shara keep going? Like, I don't get it. Later in the fight, it was refereed correctly. This one wasn't. I don't know if there's a reffing problem in the UFC, but I just think it's a tough job. This was not a great showcase of refereeing tonight, I'll be honest. Multiple times wasn't really great. One part, the first fight, though, on the main card, it didn't matter. Abus Magomedov was able to easily defeat Michel Okelenczejczuk with a counter elbow that put down Mikel, and then he was able to find the guillotine submission from there while he already had Okelenczejczuk very, very hurt. A first round win for Abus. That's kind of been the story with Abus recently, is he's able to put on a really, really good pressure in that first round. He can hurt you. He's dangerous. I just don't really see what you do with him at 185 at this point. Maybe the matchup with Izzy's there. After Strickland's performances, you don't rematch him with Sean. So Abus is probably that 10 to 15. You have Izzy at 9. So maybe you run that as kind of a fun matchup. As for Mikel, I think you keep him around the UFC. You let him fight on these openers on the fight nights, and then maybe the featured prelim on a bigger card. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be striking. Either he's going to sleep or somebody else is. That's just how it goes. It didn't go his way in front of a pretty pro home crowd. The Ibus went in there and spoiled the party. So pretty cool. If we move on to the PFL San Diego really quick, 42-year-old Liz Carmouche can still fight. I think this is more of a testament of how horribly low level women's MMA is. And there's like 3 girls that are even worth watching in the entire world. And honestly, the PFL is one of them. They have a couple of them. Cyborg is still up there. They have Dakota Dichevich, who's I like her. I like her a lot. There's obviously Valentina Shevchenko. We have Amanda Nunes. There's Kayla Harrison. So I won't be too hard on women's MMA. My wife, Alexa Grasso. There's a lot of good female fighters who are out there. I just think the depth in these weight classes is not really that high. Liz Carmouche was able to easily defeat Viviana in the second round via guillotine submission. And Viviana made the mistake of shooting for the takedown. Liz Carmouche just grabbed the guillotine, easily able to submit Viviana. It's just low-level women's MMA. Not much happened up to that. It was mainly just Viviana being stuffed on her takedowns against the fence, and Liz just doing nothing. And then the second she was lifted up, grabbed the guillotine, was able to finish it easy. She called for the PFL to add a 135-pound women's division. I just don't know who there is to fight if you do that. Like, I respect it. I respect what you're trying to do here, but there wouldn't bring a lot of value to the PFL to put those fights on. If you want to fight at 135 still, Liz, I think you have to challenge UFC people, and that can't happen as you're still under the PFL banner. Obviously, there's a couple fights to be made for Liz, but 42 years old and you're still beating up contenders? Hey, props to her. AJ McKee put on a veteran lesson in the main event. It's something I predicted. It was quite clear. It was kind of an obvious beatdown. There was at no point that the undefeated Kazakhstani was able to even touch AJ McKee. No points where he really rocked him too badly. His takedowns were ineffective. AJ just kept wearing him down, took him down, won the scrambles. I mean, there was a couple decent scrambles from the kid. I just think it was a clear level showing AJ is the best of the best in the PFL and Bellator that he has. I believe he deserves to challenge for that PFL/Bellator United belt now, as he was obviously the belt holder multiple times in Bellator. It's time for him to take that PFL belt. Super exciting matchup. We're actually going to have no UFC matchups this coming weekend. We're going to do a lot of CFL action. There's a break in the cards because July 11th, going to be a massive show. Return of the Mac. Conor McGregor, as we talked about, is fighting Max Holloway July 11th. So the UFC will be taking a 1-week break in order to prep for that show. We will break down all the action on SamCentre as always. Let's wrap up Victory Monday with the CFL Week 4 wrap-up. All right, moving on to our final part of the show. It's Victory Monday, baby. The flag behind me will stay up until the Double E lose. And that means it's staying up until the Grey Cup because we are not losing. The Edmonton Elks, as we talked about on our Friday show, went in on Thursday night, June 25th, the first game of the Week 4 slate for the CFL, and they took it to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You know, they went up early and they were unrelenting, but there was a time where Winnipeg was able to claw it back in the game and Edmonton didn't give up. In previous years, this team would have folded. There would have been a moment in that game where we felt bad about ourselves for giving up the lead and then it wouldn't have happened. But this team is different. There is an air around this team. There are real superstars on every single position on the field. We have defensive reinforcements coming back. There's guys in Royce and different guys on our defense and our offensive line who are CFL Grey Cup champions, all-stars at their positions. They will only add to the depth in potentially what's the best defense in all of the CFL. I mean, look at the other scores we're going to talk about. This game ended by a score of 23-18 for the Edmonton Elks, with Cody Fajardo leading a late touchdown drive with under 3 minutes remaining, finding the end zone with under 1 minute remaining to end up winning the game for the Edmonton Elks, have them start 3-0 for the first time since 2017 for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They dropped another home game, back-to-back home games now. Pretty good attendance for them, but 2 losses in a row to Hamilton and then to Edmonton respectfully. And this is a big deal for Winnipeg. I think you're starting to fall behind now. So we'll talk about our next game. It does help them out a bit. But you can't be losing games early in the CFL, and especially not your home games. So I don't believe there's major controversy. Again, like we talked about, pretty winnable game for Winnipeg, but there's been a couple winnable games for you, and you haven't won them. So the wins need to stack up. It's still quite early, only week 4. The Edmonton Elks and Justin Rankin are the real deal. We're going to do our power rankings on our Wednesday show, and let's see who's number 1. But I just want to say this. There's one team that's undefeated, and there's one team who has beaten Montreal, and that's Edmonton. So we'll keep moving down the slate. The Toronto Argonauts took on the Saskatchewan Roughriders in their home game at their obviously regular home stadium, Mosaic Stadium in Regina, where the Toronto Argonauts are from. Really interesting because they went and they won their home game. So the crowd that was pro Riders the entire time, but this game maybe finally showed the cracks in the champs that we kind of thought might happen. And it's not the offense. The Riders are able to put up points. They were able to move the ball against a Toronto team, and they were able to, at times, be effective. But the offensive line did not play well in front of Trevor Harris. They were missing AJ Ouellette, which is a big deal, but the running back wasn't necessarily an issue. There were a couple times in pass protection where you could really tell they were missing their regular pass protection running back. You know, a couple blitzes that got through that maybe they shouldn't. But I don't think that was the deciding factor of the game. I think it really was Chad Kelly and the Toronto Argonauts had zero issue moving the ball against the Saskatchewan Roughriders all game. And it was, if they needed a first down and there was 6 or 7 yards to go, they were going to get it. If they needed a chunk play, Chad Kelly could just air it out on first down, air it out again on second down, and it felt like the Riders had no choice but to give pass interference up or give up the big play. And there was a couple of moments where Chad Kelly missed people by an inch, and this game could have been maybe even greater in the scoring department. 40-34 for the Toronto Argonauts over the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Riders are going to be just fine. I think there was a couple injuries. There's a couple of different things that you have to factor in. Regular season game after previously being undefeated in their other ones. I think the Riders are going to be okay. I wouldn't necessarily panic on anything. It's just more of a deal of Toronto's going to put up points against anybody this week or this year. There's going to be multiple weeks where they put up 40 points a game. They just did it last week against Ottawa. They do it again against Saskatchewan. Maybe Toronto reminds me a little bit of Hamilton in previous years. Not super sold on the defense. I think they can get pressure to the quarterback at different times. Maybe that's a credit to their coaching staff because I don't know about their defense as far as big names and skill position guys. But that offense, that special teams unit in Toronto too, you can't kick it to ground. Otherwise, you are in big, big trouble. Saskatchewan learned that obviously at different times. I think it's very interesting where to project Toronto in the East. I thought it was going to be clear cut. Hamilton as 2 in that side. We're still going to have to see when they match up. Hamilton against Toronto might be 45-44. I'm excited for it. Let's keep moving down the slate. Sunday, June 27th, Saturday, June 27th, the BC Lions and the Calgary Stampeders played the first game in the Kelowna series. Touchdown Kelowna. The CFL panel was there live. Pretty cool experience, I think, seeing the Apple Bowl after being in Kelowna at different times in my life. It was cool to see it with the new temporary seating all dolled up. I will actually be there live for the Edmonton Elks taking on the BC Lions next week for week 5. And it was kind of a cool teaser for this, right? And you saw kind of a game that was similar to BC's last game, where the final score looks competitive. Stampeders 41, Lions 33. So you see the Stampeders on the Victory Monday board. And how it worked out with the final score being only down 8 for BC, they had to score twice again in garbage time, essentially, in the fourth quarter in order to make that game competitive. And it's the same thing that they did in their previous game, where BC is able to pull up a couple late touchdowns and make the score look a little bit closer than it was. And that's not the story of the game. Calgary dominated in literally every aspect. And I think for BC, they're in the same boat as the Riders right now. Except the Riders have wins and BC doesn't. And that's the biggest difference. For the Riders, there's some reason to be concerned about the defense, about the special teams. And that's the exact thing to be concerned about with the BC Lions. They're obviously capable of moving the ball, although at different times they weren't. And it's the same in their other games. They just don't move the ball at different times. But I think they'll be okay there once they get some more receivers back, their offensive linemen, that sort of thing. This defense is terrible. It's a problem for them, and it's really causing them to be blown out, and then they're not able to settle in, play their game, dictate the pace. And now you're seeing a Lions team, as we all expected, the Lions don't have a win, and the Elks don't have a loss, and we are heading into week 5 of the Canadian Football League. All is balanced in the universe. Obviously, the Lions will have a chance to break the undefeated streak of the Edmonton Elks next week in a game that will be happening in Kelowna as well. For the Calgary Stampeders, this is the win you've been looking for. You've been close in your other games and you felt like you were right on the edge there. Vernon Adams has been playing extremely well. You have guys at the wide receiver position who can stretch the field. You have one of the best running backs in the CFL. You have an offensive lineman who can create plays, create holes for your running back. And so now when you're looking at the Calgary Stampeders, you think to yourself, this is a team that's going to be competitive in the West. I think they'd probably beat Winnipeg if we went and ran that one. I think they'd be competitive with Edmonton and with Saskatchewan, certainly. So we'll see. I think the power rankings next on Wednesday's show, it's going to be very, very interesting. Vernon Adams got his win against his old team, though, and I think it always means a little bit more when VA is able to play his good friend, Nathan Rourke, kind of show, hey, why'd you guys kind of let me loose. Obviously, we know Nathan Rourke is worth every penny of what he's being paid, but Vernon Adams is here. He's able to make all the throws, and he's able to lead that Stampeders offense. I am going to be at their next game, the Stampede Bowl against the Toronto Argonauts, and I am extremely excited. I'll film what I can for you guys. Montreal Alouettes against the Ottawa Redblacks. I told you guys, walk in the park. Davis Alexander is not losing 2 in a row, and certainly not to Ottawa. Ottawa stinks. They're not going to win a single game this year. And in the first half, it was easy money, right? 21-6. Montreal's got this in the bag. I turn off the game, right? But to Ottawa's credit, they continued to fight on the road in Montreal, able to do that. And what was the biggest kind of thing for me to look at was the play of Jake Maier in the second half as opposed to the first half. So he was not afraid to put the ball in really tight windows. And this game, it worked out. I think you can see how Jake will have those games where he has multiple interceptions, because some of those balls easily could have been intercepted. The first touchdown that they scored at the start of the second half, you know that Montreal player is about a foot away from making the play, but he doesn't, and it's a touchdown. And then you look at one of their later touchdowns where he throws it up in the back of the end zone. Another ball that could have easily been knocked away, intercepted, but it wasn't, right? And so now you start to see a comeback by Ottawa in the second half that if they were able to just make their extra points, this game maybe could have gone a different way. 37 for Montreal, 35 for Ottawa. Davis Alexander showing again why he is so hard to beat in the regular season, because he can go out there and score at will. One potential flag for Montreal is that Davis was limping pretty good in that fourth quarter. He has had leg issues in the past, so that could be an area of concern, because when Davis is out, you are a completely different team and you look different. I'm not saying he's going to be out, but he was wobbling pretty good. And if Davis is forced to miss any bit of time, that will be key for Montreal. And in a tight race now in the East, with teams like Hamilton and Toronto showing that they can really play, Ottawa coming back and making it a game, I don't think you can afford to not have your star, because you have some wide receivers who can break the game open. Philpott is unbelievable at football. This guy, you just throw the ball to him at any point in the game, and he's going to, like, every single one of his stat lines, except for his game against Hamilton, well over 100 yards receiving. Today, almost 200 yards receiving as I'm recording this. Yesterday, as you are watching it, incredible performance by the Montreal Alouettes and a lot of grit shown by the Ottawa Redblacks. Eventually, you'll be on this Victory Monday board, but it is not your week. Same for you, BC Lions, and I really hope next week's not your week either. The 4 teams on our Victory Monday board to wrap up our CFL Monday show. Extremely excited to talk on Wednesday power rankings, and then Friday we are going to have a bit of a different setup. I am going to be on the road. We talked about it on our previous show. SamCentre's hitting the road, baby. We are heading down to Calgary on Thursday in order to watch the Stampede Bowl, the Calgary Stampeders. I'm going to be recording what I can from Calgary, hopefully get some really cool action. There's some awesome concerts happening at halftime. And then I'm going to be continuing my journey west on our beautiful province to BC, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to be the kickoff series Kelowna, the second game in Kelowna, the Edmonton Elks, the BC Lions. Hopefully the Elks can remain undefeated and the Lions can remain winless. Either way, I'm looking forward to seeing high-level quarterback play on both sides. A running back in Justin Rankin, who is incredible every time he touches the ball. I'm going to get you guys fan interactions, fields. I'm going to try and vlog the water, everything that I can in BC, show you guys my journey along the way. SamCentre out, baby. Yo, I'm sat on the throne, but I'm looking at the blueprints. Building a temple where the spirit leaves its footprints. Gibeonites, the most high asked what I'm needing. Didn't ask for peas or for enemies to be bleeding. I asked for the wisdom, the hokmah, the insight to distinguish the dark from the frequency of light. See, I built the first house, cedar, wood and gold plate between Jashin and Boaz, standing at the gate. The pillars of the world, severity and mercy. The path is narrow, man, the road is getting thirsty, but the temple lays stone, that's the trick for the blind. The real masonry is the structure of the mind. Seal of the king, 2 triangles entwined. The lower reflecting the upper design. Master of the spirit,
turning up the Yeah, they say I had the ring, the brass and the iron, commanding the glacier, the wolf and the lion. See, the demons are just facets of the ego and the greed. I harness the shadows to plant the holy seed. You gotta kill the beast, you gotta make it move the blocks. Put the vices in the furnace, turning keys inside the lock. 72 spirits, yeah, I kept them in the vessel. Every conscious man has a demon he must wrestle. If you don't control the lower, then the lower controls you. That's how the temple falls and the spirit gets through. I saw the vanity, the chasing of the wind, but the wisdom is the treasure underneath the skin. I sat with the queen, yeah, Sheba brought the riddle, trying to find a set and not the sides or the middles. She saw your cupbearer, the order of the table. Realize the history is more than just a fable. It's the key of Solomon, the magic in the mouth, finding your geometry on the righteous path. From the quarry to the corner, I'm the stone they rejected. To the master workman saw the spirit was perfected. Modern day Solomon and building in the ends, turning all the haters and the demons into friends. The temple is complete when the heart is in tune. From the rising of the sun to the setting of the moon. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity unless you know the architect. Build your house on the rock, man, not the sand. The seal is set, the wisdom remains. The wisdom remains. Oh!